You don't deserve to be in his will, Kayla said, her voice sharp and calm, like she had practiced it. She looked me square in the eye, standing just inches away from David's casket, while mourners quietly whispered condolences around us. There wasn't a hint of grief in her face, only calculation. I stood frozen, the cold edge of her words slicing deeper than any winter wind could. Her husband, my son, lay just feet away, and still she found space to wound me. But I didn't react, not with a word, not with a tremble. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope that had been resting in there for days, and pressed it gently into her hand. "This is David's will," I said softly. Then I turned, walked out of the church in silence, and left her standing there, the paper shaking in her hands, her face drained of all color, because she was wrong. I didn't deserve to be in his will. I was meant to be. Before we dive into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that speak to the heart. That moment, that single moment, had been a long time coming. It wasn't about money or houses or paperwork. It was about something much deeper. Something that had slowly eroded over the years, like the shoreline giving way to the tide. Kayla had always had this way of looking at me, like I was a fragile antique that didn't quite fit in their sleek, modern home. Polite, always, but never warm, never open. And David, my only child, my heart outside my body. He was stuck in the middle, trying to keep peace where there never really was any war. Just small, sharp knives hidden in smiles. Losing him. I still can't believe it's real. He was 34, a quiet, steady force. He worked in tech, ran half marathons, called me every Sunday. The doctors called it sudden cardiac arrest, just gone. I remember the moment the phone rang. It was 2:17 a.m. I still checked the clock at that time. I remember falling to my knees in the kitchen, clutching the phone, whispering his name like a prayer. I remember Kayla's voice on the other end, flat, rehearsed. "He didn't make it," she said. And now here we were, at his wake, surrounded by flowers and silence and too many people who didn't know him like I did. And she chose this moment to draw her line in the sand. "You don't deserve to be in his will." Not, "I'm sorry for your loss." Not, "He loved you." Not even a simple human, "Are you okay?" She wanted to erase me. She wanted to win. But what she didn't know, what she never knew, was that David saw everything. The eye rolls, the subtle dismissals, the way she cut me out of their lives piece by piece. And before he died, he had taken steps, quietly, deliberately. He left her out. He left me everything. And in the moment when she tried to strip me of my place in his life, I reminded her exactly where I stood. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about truth. And David, my sweet, quiet boy, had made sure the truth would speak long after he was gone. Before all the silence and pain, before the cold stares and the funeral flowers, there was laughter. There were late-night movie marathons on our living room couch, with David curled under a blanket and me pretending I wasn't crying during the sad parts. There were birthdays where he'd make me hand-drawn cards, even when he was in college. And every Sunday morning, without fail, my phone would ring at 10 a.m., and I'd hear, "Hey, Mom, you doing okay?" For so long, it was just the two of us. When Frank, my husband, passed away from pancreatic cancer, David was 24. He moved back home without hesitation, not out of obligation, out of love. He told me, "We'll figure this out together." And we did. I never imagined I'd raise a man like him. He was thoughtful, steady, kind in a quiet way. The kind of person who remembered your favorite soup when you were sick and drove across town just to bring it to your porch. He didn't need to make big declarations. He just showed up, always. I watched him build his career from scratch, long nights studying, setbacks that would have broken anyone else. but he never gave up. When he finally landed a job at a tech firm in the city, I remember crying more than he did. And then came Kayla. She was striking, smart, and so sure of herself. When David first brought her over, I remember feeling happy for him. He looked proud to have her beside him, and I didn't want to be the kind of mother who questioned everything. I welcomed her in with open arms. I set the table with my grandmother's china. I made Frank's favorite roast. I even passed down a pearl necklace that had been in the family for generations. At first, Kayla was polite, not warm, but courteous. I chalked it up to nerves. She worked long hours and carried herself like someone who never let her guard down, not even in a living room full of baby photos. I tried harder. I offered to help them decorate their new place. I baked on holidays. I stayed in the background during their wedding planning, even when my own suggestions were brushed aside without a second thought. I kept telling myself it was fine. I had raised a son who would make space for me. I believed I had a permanent place in his life, no matter who came into it. When they got married, I sat in the second row, beaming. I watched David's face as he said his vows. I saw the tears he wiped away when he talked about loyalty, about building a life with love and compassion. I was so proud of him that day, not just for finding someone, but for becoming someone, a man, a husband. After the ceremony, Kayla gave me a polite hug and said, "Thanks for everything, Marla." I smiled and told her, "You're family now." But something inside her eyes didn't quite match her words. Still, I dismissed it. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just adjusting to change. I wanted peace. I wanted them to thrive. I was willing to take a step back if it meant they could move forward. I didn't see what was really happening, not yet, because for a while, everything seemed fine. We had dinners together, holidays weren't too awkward, and David still called on Sundays. Kayla would occasionally join in, brief and distracted, but there. They looked happy on social media. They went to Napa, to Colorado, even Paris once. And every time I saw the photos, I felt this warm little flicker. Like all the years I poured into raising him had blossomed into something beautiful. I believed I had done my job. I believed I was safe in their circle. I believed the future still had a place for me. I didn't see the distance growing. I didn't hear the silence creeping in. I didn't feel the cold until it was already winter. But back then, back when I still felt like mom meant something solid, I was content, maybe even a little naive. But mostly, I was proud of him, of us. Before everything fell apart, we were a story worth telling. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I dropped by their house. Nothing formal, just a surprise visit with a tray of homemade lasagna. David had always loved it. Every year on his birthday, even when he moved out, he'd ask, "You made the lasagna, right?" It was our thing. I knocked twice and let myself in, the way I always had. David had given me a key when they moved in. "This is your home too, Mom," he'd said. I never used it without notice, except this once. I had just finished baking and thought they'd be thrilled. The house was quiet. I stepped inside, took off my shoes, and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. That's when I heard Kayla's voice, clipped, sharp, and low enough that she didn't think anyone was listening. "She needs to stop showing up like she owns the place," she said. There was a pause, followed by her sigh. "Honestly, she makes this weird. She treats David like he's still 12. I stood frozen behind the corner wall, the tray of lasagna growing heavier in my arms. My heart pounded in my chest, not from anger, from confusion. Was she talking about me? There was no one else who fit that description. David mumbled something I couldn't make out. I leaned closer. "I'm not saying cut her off," Kayla continued, "but we're married now. We don't need her hovering all the time. I need space. And so do you." I backed away quietly, my throat tight. I didn't want them to know I heard. I placed the lasagna on the kitchen counter and left a sticky note. "Hope this makes your evening a little easier. Love, Mom." Then I slipped out the front door before either of them saw me. I sat in my car staring at the steering wheel for a long time. I wasn't sure how to feel. Embarrassed, unwanted, maybe both. I tried to tell myself she didn't mean it. Maybe she was tired or stressed. Maybe she was feeling overwhelmed with work and needed boundaries. But I couldn't shake the way she said it, like I was a burden. I didn't mention it to David, not that day, not ever. Instead, I started giving them space. Canceling Sunday dinners, skipping small get-togethers. When David would ask why, I'd say, "Just a little tired, sweetheart. You two enjoy your time." It hurt to pull back, but I wanted to respect their marriage. I convinced myself it was temporary, that once they had kids, once life settled, things would fall into place and I'd be needed again. Not just for babysitting, but for advice, for comfort, for love. But from that day forward, I noticed more. Kayla started sending David to pick up the holiday gifts I left. Her messages to me got shorter, more businesslike. "Thanks for the casserole." Got the card. Noted. And David, well, he tried. I could feel him trying. He'd call, still ask how I was, but there was a weight in his voice, a hesitation, like he was stuck between his loyalty to me and the pressure he felt from her. I never blamed him. I blamed myself for walking in uninvited, for not knocking longer, for assuming I still had the same place in his life. I replayed her words for weeks, trying to figure out what I had done to deserve that tone. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about one visit or one tray of food. This was about something deeper, something she felt that had nothing to do with who I was, and everything to do with the role she thought I should play. Invisible, silent, gone. That moment behind the wall was the first red flag. A small one, maybe, easy to dismiss, but it would be the first of many, and I ignored it because I loved my son, and because I still believed love alone could hold everything together. There wasn't one big moment when I realized I was slowly being erased. It wasn't a fight or a slammed door or even another comment like the one I overheard that day in their kitchen. No, it was 1,000 small shifts, so quiet, so subtle, that I nearly convinced myself I was imagining them. The changes began with communication. David stopped calling every Sunday. At first, I made excuses for him. He must have been busy. Work was hectic. Maybe they were traveling. I'd check his social media and see pictures from brunches, parties, day trips, but never a word from him. So I started calling instead. I'd leave voicemails. "Just checking in, sweetheart," trying to sound upbeat, light, unbothered. Days would pass before I got a text back. Sometimes I didn't get one at all. I told myself not to take it personally. When I did hear from him, the conversations felt different, rushed. He was always just heading into a meeting or trying to catch up on errands. I'd ask how things were with Kayla, and he'd give short answers. Fine. Busy. She's been stressed, you know how it is. But I didn't know how it was. He wasn't letting me in anymore. Then came the holidays. Every year since he was a boy, David had helped me decorate my Christmas tree. We'd unpack the same old box of mismatched ornaments, paper stars he made in 3rd grade, a painted reindeer I bought at a flea market. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. That first year after the wedding, I waited for him to suggest a time. I waited until mid-December before I finally called. "Oh," he said, "Kayla and I already put our tree up last weekend." It was kind of a last-minute thing. Just like that, our tradition was gone. He didn't even seem to notice. That Christmas Eve, they didn't come by. Kayla had planned a dinner with her family, and David didn't want to make a big thing out of it. I sat at my table alone with a plate of stuffing and cranberry sauce, telling myself they were newlyweds, figuring things out. It was normal. It was fine. But it kept happening. Birthdays were reduced to text messages. I'd knit Kayla a scarf and never see her wear it. I'd ask David how his work project was going, and he'd forget he even told me about it. And when I offered to help with anything, cleaning, planning, errands, it was always, "Thanks, but we've got it covered." I was disappearing. Once, I saw them at the grocery store. I was picking out tomatoes when I spotted them 2 aisles over. I waved. Kayla glanced at me, nodded briefly, then turned her back. David looked conflicted, almost embarrassed. He walked over, gave me a quick hug, and said, "We're in a bit of a rush. Talk soon?" He never called. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was how easily they seemed to live without me. Like all those years I spent being his foundation, his cheerleader, his safe place. None of it mattered now. I was an old chapter in a book they'd already closed. Still, I tried. I clung to small things. I left flowers on their porch when Kayla got a promotion. I baked cookies for David's coworkers. I mailed birthday cards with notes reminding him of childhood memories. But the responses dwindled. A thumbs-up emoji, a brief, "Thanks." Sometimes, nothing at all. My sister Eileen called me one night. "You sound tired," she said. "Are you okay?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to pour out everything I was feeling. The heartbreak, the slow fade, the ache of watching my son slip away from me like sand through my fingers. But I didn't. I just said, "I'm fine. Just getting older, I guess." But it wasn't age. It was erasure. And the most painful part? I wasn't even being pushed away harshly. I was just being overlooked. Like I was no longer necessary, no longer seen. I went from being his everything to being his obligation. And then, not even that, it was Kayla's birthday. She was turning 31 and they were hosting a dinner at their place. Not too formal, just a close circle of friends and family. When David called to invite me, I was surprised. We hadn't spoken much in weeks, and the last few messages had been short and mechanical. But I accepted immediately. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe this was his way of saying, "You're still part of our lives, Mom." I spent the whole morning baking Kayla's favorite lemon cake, the same one I'd made 2 years earlier when she first visited our home and said, "This is amazing. Can I get the recipe?" I'd written it out on a note card and slipped it into a floral envelope. She never thanked me, but she'd eaten 2 slices that day. I took that as enough. I even wore a new blouse I'd picked up on clearance, something bright, cheerful. I curled my hair, added some lipstick, just enough to feel like myself. When I arrived, I took a deep breath before knocking, balancing the cake in one hand and a small wrapped gift in the other. Kayla opened the door. Her eyes flicked down to the cake and then back to me. "Oh," she said, "you're here early." I wasn't. I was 5 minutes past the invite time. She stepped aside, barely smiling. "Just put that in the kitchen." I walked in, greeted David with a hug, longer than usual, maybe too long, and then moved toward the kitchen. Inside, I spotted a fancy white cake already on the counter, embossed with pink roses and golden letters. "Happy birthday, Kayla." I hesitated, then placed mine off to the side quietly. Guests started arriving soon after. Kayla's co-workers, her sister and her fiancé, a few friends David had gone to college with. Everyone was younger, louder, faster. I couldn't keep up with the pace of conversation. Marketing buzzwords, startup jargon, designer handbags. I sat at the end of the dining table, trying to join in when I could. Then, the conversation turned to family. Someone asked, "So, Kayla, are your parents still in Florida?" Kayla laughed. "Yeah, still retired and obsessed with their lawn. I keep telling them to get a life." Everyone laughed. Then her friend Dana looked down the table and said, "And Marla, you're David's mom, right?" I smiled, glad to be acknowledged. "That's right. Since the day he was born." Dana smiled. "He's such a good guy. You must be proud." "I am," I said. "He always had a gentle heart. Even as a baby." That's when Kayla cut in. "She still tells people he's her little boy," she said with a smirk. "He's 34, but you'd think she was still packing his lunches." Laughter broke out. Sharp, unkind. My heart thudded. I tried to smile, pretend it was a joke, but my face betrayed me. I felt my mouth tighten. My hands clenched in my lap. "And that lemon cake she brought," Kayla added, raising her wine glass. "It's sweet, like a Hallmark card. A little outdated, but sweet." More laughter. Someone said, "Hey, at least she baked. My mom would have just Venmo'd me." But the damage was done. My cheeks burned. My chest ached with something worse than embarrassment. It was dismissal. That moment didn't just mock my cake or my memories, it mocked who I was to them. I looked over at David. He didn't say a word, didn't meet my eyes, didn't defend me. That silence was louder than anything Kayla had said. I stayed through dessert. I smiled when they lit the candles, even clapped when Kayla unwrapped the designer purse David gave her. But inside, something had shifted. It wasn't just a passing hurt. It was a fracture, a deep one. Because humiliation doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes at a birthday dinner from someone who married your child. And sometimes it's served cold, right beside the cake you lovingly baked. I didn't go back to their house for a while after Kayla's birthday dinner. Something had broken inside me that night. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, permanently. The look in David's eyes when he sat silently letting them laugh at me haunted me more than the words ever could. It wasn't just that he didn't defend me, it was that he looked indifferent, tired, like my presence embarrassed him. Still, I tried to pretend it didn't change anything. I told myself he was caught off guard, unsure of what to say. I gave him grace because I was his mother. That's what mothers do, even when their hearts are aching. Weeks passed, and I didn't hear from them. No check-ins, no invitations, not even a thank you for the birthday gift I'd wrapped carefully in gold tissue paper. A signed first edition of a book Kayla once said she loved in passing. Eventually, I called. David answered, his voice distant. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart. I was just wondering if everything's okay. Haven't seen you two in a while." There was a pause. Then he said, "Yeah, things have just been busy. Kayla's been under a lot of pressure with work." "I understand," I replied. "Would it be all right if I stopped by sometime next week?" Another pause. "Actually, Kayla and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time for some space." I felt my stomach drop. "Space?" I asked, even though I already knew what he meant. "You're always welcome in our lives," he said quickly, "but maybe not dropping in, and not getting so involved. Kayla feels like sometimes it's too much, and honestly, I do too. Too much. I was too much." I bit down on my lip to keep it from trembling. "I see. I don't want this to be a big thing," he said, his voice soft. "We just need some time to settle into our own rhythm. Maybe we can catch up soon. I'll call you, okay?" He didn't. I spent the next few days in a daze. I moved through my small condo like a ghost. I opened the fridge and stared without hunger. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, waiting for it to light up. It didn't. Then, one morning, I received a card in the mail. Not from David, from Kayla. The handwriting was cold and precise. "Marla, I appreciate the time you've given us to adjust. I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I believe it's for the best. Please respect our need for space and independence. Kayla." No greeting, no warmth, just a boundary drawn in ink. That was the moment it became clear. I wasn't just being asked to step back. I was being pushed out. I went into my bedroom and opened the old chest at the foot of the bed. The one filled with David's baby clothes, handprints from preschool, a lock of hair from his first haircut. I sat there, holding a tiny pair of shoes he once wore at 6 months old, shoes I had saved for no reason other than love. I cried quietly, my tears falling onto the soft cotton. Not loud, heaving sobs, just steady drops that felt like surrender. I didn't fight it. I didn't call and demand an explanation. I didn't plead to be let back in. Instead, I gathered the key to their house, the one David gave me years ago, and drove to their neighborhood. I parked, walked to their mailbox, and dropped it in. Just the key, no note. It was my way of saying, "I get it. You've made your choice. I walked away from that house with no anger, just hollow silence. Because sometimes, when people don't push you out with cruelty, they do it with coldness. And that kind of exile is even harder to fight. They thought I was done, that I would disappear quietly. And I did. But not because I had lost, because something inside me was still alive. And though I didn't know it yet, that ember would spark again. The days after I returned, their house key passed like fog. I didn't talk much. I didn't go out. I canceled a lunch date with Eileen and ignored her follow-up text that read, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" What could I say? That my son, the child I had once held in trembling hands at the hospital, no longer wanted me in his life? That the silence from him was louder than any goodbye? Every corner of my condo felt like a memory. The photo of David on the mantel in his college graduation gown. The quilt I'd made from his old soccer jerseys. Even the mug that said "Best Mom Ever," faded now from years of use. It all mocked me with the illusion that love was enough. That love had meant something. But apparently, love didn't make you indispensable. It made you easy to forget. I stopped cooking. What was the point? There was no one to bake for. I'd go to the store and come back with just apples and tea. Sometimes not even that. I'd sit at the kitchen table and stare at the steam rising from my mug like it was telling me something. Like it was reminding me that I was still here, even if no one noticed anymore. The nights were the worst. I'd lay awake until 3 or 4 in the morning, scrolling through old text threads with David, reading birthday messages, photos he sent from work, little videos of him laughing at some joke I'd made. I'd play them again and again, like maybe if I listened closely enough I could find a clue, a moment where things started to shift, a sign I could have caught before it was too late. But there wasn't one, and that hurt even more. One evening, I tried to distract myself by sorting through boxes in the attic. I thought maybe organizing things would give me some kind of control. Instead, I found a shoebox of cards David had made for me over the years. One from when he was 11 read, "Mom, you're my favorite person in the whole world. Even when I'm grown up, I'll always need you." I sat on the floor and sobbed. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs that racked through me like waves crashing. I held the card against my chest like it could fill the gaping hole that had opened inside me. I didn't even recognize the woman I'd become. I had once been someone. A teacher who made kids laugh, a neighbor who organized block parties, a mother who never missed a recital. But now, I was just a woman alone in a small condo with fading photographs and cold dinners. I started walking aimlessly, sometimes around the block, sometimes further. I'd leave without a destination just so I didn't have to be inside my home. I'd watch couples pushing strollers, friends laughing outside cafes, and I'd feel like a ghost moving through a world that had long forgotten me. One morning, while walking past a cafe window, I saw Kayla. She was inside laughing, dressed in a sharp blazer, holding court with 2 other women. She looked radiant, untouched, as if none of what happened had ever happened, as if David was still alive and everything was exactly as it should be. I stood across the street for a long time, watching her sip her coffee, gesture confidently, laugh like she was winning, and in that moment something shifted inside me. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't even anger. It was something deeper. A quiet, burning realization. I mattered too. I had mattered every time I stayed up with David through fevers, every time I worked 2 jobs to pay for his school supplies, every holiday meal, every handwritten note, every word of encouragement. It all mattered. Even if they had forgotten, I hadn't. I wasn't gone, I wasn't erased, not yet. Rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because from the floor, the only direction left was up. It started as a simple chore, just an afternoon of sorting. I had finally worked up the energy to clean out the last of Frank's old files. After months of feeling adrift, I told myself maybe order would help. If I couldn't fix my broken relationship with David, I could at least organize a dusty cabinet. I opened the hallway closet, pulled out the worn green metal file box Frank had kept under lock and key, and placed it on the dining table. Inside were folders labeled in his careful handwriting: taxes, retirement, mortgage, insurance. I sifted through them slowly, occasionally pausing at his notes or clipped newspaper articles, smiling faintly at his lifelong habit of saving everything, just in case. Toward the bottom, I found an envelope with thicker paper. No label, just my name in his handwriting: Marla. I stared at it. The edges were yellowed slightly. It had been sealed a long time. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a letter, folded carefully. Underneath it was a copy of a legal document, stapled, notarized. I read the letter first. It was short but deliberate, Frank's style. He had written it before his cancer took over, long before his death. Marla, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and David is older now. I've spoken to Joel about these updates, and I trust you'll handle everything the way you always do, with heart and quiet strength. This is just to protect you. If anything ever happens to David, you are to inherit everything. Not because you need it, but because you deserve peace. I hope he never has to make this decision, but if he does, I know he'll do it right. He's your son, and you've taught him well. Frank. I sat there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Then I picked up the legal document. It was a trust amendment dated 3 years before David passed, signed by Frank, signed by me, and later updated again by David. The most recent revision was only 6 months ago. It named me as the sole beneficiary in the event of David's death, including the house, his accounts, and his life insurance. It was all there. Legal, final, ironclad. David had done something. Even though we hadn't talked about it, even though we drifted, he hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't let Kayla erase me. He had seen what was happening. Somewhere along the line, maybe when Kayla's coldness turned to cruelty, he made a choice, quietly, with no fanfare, with no announcement. He honored the man who raised him and protected the woman who never stopped loving him. I reached for the table to steady myself. The weight of that moment settled deep in my chest. Not as pain, but as something else. Something like oxygen after too long underwater. My son had left me the truth, and not just in documents, but in the trust he placed in me, in the silent act of saying, I know who's always been there. I know who deserves to be okay when I'm gone. I thought of all the nights I cried, wondering if he saw me, remembered me, loved me at all. And here it was, all along. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to scream at Kayla or beg for space in a life she'd tried to push me out of. Because David had already answered the question she never thought I'd ask. I did deserve to be in his will, not because of entitlement, but because I had given everything, without ever asking for anything in return. I read the letter again, tracing Frank's handwriting with my fingertip, his faith in me, his quiet protection from beyond the grave. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Then I picked up the phone and dialed Joel Ramirez, our old family lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "Joel, it's Marla." "Marla," he said warmly. "I've been thinking of calling you." "I found the amendment," I said, "and I think it's time we talked." There was a long pause. Then his voice came back, firm and steady. "I've got everything ready for you." The morning after I spoke with Joel, I woke up before sunrise. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I finally had something to wake up for. It was the first time in months I didn't feel heavy. The first time the silence in the house felt peaceful, not oppressive. I stood by the window watching the pale blue light stretch across the rooftops and felt something stir inside me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even relief, it was resolve. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, toast, a slice of fruit. I ate slowly, deliberately. No phone in my hand, no distractions. Just me, and the quiet strength building inside my chest. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I needed to justify my place in the world. I had it. It was already mine. After breakfast, I pulled out my notebook, the one I hadn't touched since David passed. For months, it had been a place of grief, scribbled thoughts and half-formed questions. Did I do something wrong? Was I too much? Did he stop needing me? But that morning, I opened to a blank page and wrote something different. I was never too much. I just gave too much to people who didn't know what to do with it. Then I underlined it, twice. The words felt solid, like a foundation I could build something on. I got dressed, not in my usual muted sweaters or worn jeans, but in a crisp button-down blouse and the soft gray slacks I used to wear when I taught parent conferences. I brushed my hair, added a touch of lipstick, and looked in the mirror. I looked like me again. Later that morning, I met Joel at his office. His building was modest, brick exterior, ivy climbing the side. Inside, it smelled like old books and polished wood. Comforting, familiar. He stood when I walked in. "Marla," he said with a smile, "you look well." "I feel well," I replied, and I meant it. He walked me through the details, the updates Frank had made, the decisions David had quietly followed through on. The paper trail was clear. I was the named beneficiary of everything David left behind. The house, the savings, the life insurance policy. It was all airtight. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked softly. Joel paused, folding his hands. "I think he wanted to handle it without upsetting Kayla. Maybe he hoped things would turn around, but he also wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of. That part was never in question." I nodded slowly, letting that truth settle deeper. David hadn't turned his back on me. He hadn't disappeared without care. He had watched everything and chosen to protect me, even if it meant doing it in silence. As I left Joel's office, I stepped into the sunlight and took the deepest breath I'd taken in months. I didn't feel victorious. I felt vindicated. For years, I had bent over backward to be included, to be welcome. I had tried to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to love. But the truth was, I had always deserved a seat at the table. Not because of what I gave, but because of who I was. A mother, a wife, a woman who had shown up day after day without being asked, and never once expected anything in return. I went home and made a list, not a to-do list, a life list. Donate to David's college scholarship fund. Take that weekend trip Eileen keeps inviting me on, clear out the guest bedroom, and turn it into a writing space. Start fresh. Every item felt like a reclamation. Every checkmark would be one more way of saying, "I'm not broken, I'm still here." That night, I lit a candle on the porch and sat in the rocker Frank had built years ago. I closed my eyes and whispered into the still evening, "I hear you, David, and I'm going to be okay." Not because someone handed me power, but because I remembered where it always lived, inside me. I didn't announce anything. No dramatic phone calls, no letters, no confrontations. Instead, I started preparing, quietly, intentionally, with the kind of calm only pain can teach you. My first call was to the bank. The account transfer from David's savings went smoothly. Joel had already submitted the documentation. The woman on the other end of the line said, "It's good to see everything in order, Mrs. Jensen." I smiled politely, though my chest felt heavy at the sound of my last name, the name I had carried through decades of love and loss. Next, I called a realtor. The house David and Kayla had lived in together now legally belonged to me. I had no interest in stepping inside again, not out of spite, but because I knew it no longer held anything for me. That home had been painted over with coldness, exclusion, and erasure. Still, I wouldn't sell it right away. Not yet. I had plans that didn't involve Kayla, or her opinion. I met with Joel again and asked about timelines, taxes, closing documents. We went through everything carefully. I asked smart questions. I took notes. I was measured, composed, and precise. I have to say, Joel remarked as he looked over the folder, you're handling all this with remarkable grace. I spent a long time feeling powerless, I replied. Now I'm just making sure I never feel that way again. When I got home that day, I made tea and sat down with a legal pad. I titled the top, What Comes Next? The first thing I wrote was freedom. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I wasn't trying to punish Kayla. That would have meant I still needed something from her. Validation, apology, recognition. I didn't. What I wanted now was a life I didn't have to beg to belong in. I started looking into charities, particularly ones that offered scholarships to single mothers returning to college. David had always admired women who raised families while chasing dreams. They work twice as hard, he'd said once, and people notice them half as much. That line stayed with me. I knew what I wanted to do with a portion of his savings. Later that week, I also contacted a contractor. I had no plans of moving into David and Kayla's old house, but I did want to renovate the small guest home on the back of my property, the one Frank had once used as a woodworking studio. I envisioned transforming it into a quiet retreat space for women who needed rest, solitude, safety, women who'd been forgotten. I would name it the Jensen Cottage, a place built on the legacy of love, not rejection. The days were full now, not busy for the sake of it, but full in a way that gave me purpose again. I repotted the plants on my porch. I sent Eileen a voicemail saying, "That trip you mentioned? I think I'm ready." I even started journaling again, but not about grief, about rebuilding. And the entire time, I said nothing to Kayla. She hadn't contacted me since the funeral. I assumed she believed everything would default to her. The house, the assets, the control. She didn't know about the will, about the trust, about what David had done behind the scenes out of quiet loyalty. I didn't correct her. I let her live in that illusion because I knew how quickly it was going to collapse. That's the thing about people who believe they've won. They never check the foundation. They don't see the cracks forming. They don't realize the ground is shifting beneath them until it's too late. I simply moved in silence, brick by brick, preparing the structure of my next chapter. And the more I built, the less I needed validation. My anger turned to clarity, my sorrow to strength. I had nothing left to prove, just a life to reclaim. And I was doing it, not with noise, not with fury, but with quiet, steady hands. The kind that raise sons, the kind that survive grief, the kind that rebuild from ashes and don't need to shout about it. I first noticed the shift at the grocery store. I was standing in line with a basket full of canned soup and oranges when I heard a voice behind me, sharp, impatient. "Excuse me." I turned. It was Kayla. She looked surprised to see me, but more than that, she looked frazzled. Her hair was tucked into a messy ponytail, her makeup smudged. Her eyes, once cold and composed, darted nervously around. She was pushing a cart of frozen dinners, a few boxes of tissues, and 3 bottles of wine. "Marla," she said flatly. "Didn't expect to see you here?" I smiled, small, polite. "Well, people have to eat." She didn't respond. I watched her eyes fall on the ring of mail keys I still carried, one of them to the mailbox of the house she was still living in, a house that was no longer hers. The understanding flickered in her gaze, though she said nothing, just looked away. I paid for my groceries and walked past her without another word. That was the first crack. The second came a few days later. Joel called and said, her attorney reached out. She's been trying to file paperwork contesting the estate. She's going to be disappointed, I said. She already is, he replied. I sent over the trust documents and the notarized updates. There's no loophole. David made sure of that. I imagined her opening those papers, expecting ownership, entitlement, only to realize everything had already been accounted for. Carefully, legally, permanently. And I didn't gloat. I simply exhaled. The ground beneath her was beginning to crumble, slowly, inevitably. What she didn't understand, what so many people like her never do, is that power doesn't always come from control. Real power lives in integrity, in loyalty, in what people do when no one is watching. David hadn't needed to make speeches. He had acted. And now those actions were echoing through every corner of her illusion. She stopped showing up at the places we used to cross paths. The bookstore downtown, the farmer's market on Saturdays. Mutual friends started calling me again. One of David's old coworkers, a sweet girl named Lena, emailed to say he always said his mom was the strongest person he knew. Little by little, I felt my place returning. Not because I demanded it, but because it had always been there. People were starting to see what David had seen. Even the realtor, when I visited the property for a final walkthrough, looked at me curiously and said, "So, you're the owner?" I nodded. Yes, the trust was clear. She tilted her head. "Good for you. I've been to this house a few times before. You could feel it. Something off. Cold. But it doesn't feel that way with you here." Cold. That word again. That's what Kayla had turned it into. A house of performance, not partnership. And now she was standing in the ruins of her own design. The realtor asked when I wanted to list it. I said, "Not yet." There was something poetic about leaving it as it was for a while. Letting Kayla live with the echoes, the absence, the consequences, letting her feel the silence. I didn't speak to her. She didn't reach out to me. But I knew she felt it, the way a deer senses a shift in the wind. She had spent so long acting like I was nothing. Now I was everything she couldn't touch. And I wasn't doing anything dramatic. No emails, no gloating, no public scenes. Just calm, quiet, unstoppable momentum. The balance had tipped. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't the one trying to hold on. She was. David's wake was held at the same church where he'd been baptized 34 years earlier. I hadn't stepped inside since Frank's funeral. That day, I'd been surrounded by family, hugged tightly, comforted endlessly. But now, walking into the familiar space alone, I felt like I was stepping into a courtroom. Except the trial was already over, and I'd already been judged. The room was full but hushed, blanketed in the kind of stillness that only death can bring. People whispered in corners. A slideshow played on the far wall, photos of David as a child, David on graduation day, David and Kayla smiling in front of their house. Most of the images I had taken, none of them had my face. I took a seat near the front, alone. Kayla arrived 20 minutes late in a sleek black dress and oversized sunglasses. She didn't look at me. She walked straight past, flanked by two of her friends, and took her place in the reserved row. I noticed it immediately. Not a single chair had been saved for me. No mother of the deceased tag. No whispered invitation to come sit closer. Nothing. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Because I knew what was coming. After the pastor gave a few words and others shared memories, Kayla stood up. She spoke with practiced grief, her voice polished. "David was the love of my life," she said. "He believed in hard work, in ambition, and in building a future with purpose. Not a single mention of his childhood, of Frank, of me. It was revisionist history in real time, and no one dared interrupt." When she finished, she looked down at me. Finally. Her eyes held that same glint they always had when she was dismissing me without having to speak. I smiled, because I had come prepared. After the ceremony, people moved to the reception hall for coffee and finger sandwiches. I waited quietly near the corner of the room, and then I saw her approach. Kayla walked toward me, perfectly composed. "I assume you'll be clearing out the house soon," she said softly. "David and I had discussed keeping it in the family. I'd like to be involved in that process." I met her eyes. You can't be involved in something that no longer belongs to you. She blinked, thrown for a second. Excuse me? I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope Joel had given me, sealed, official. I handed it to her. What is this? She asked. David's will, I replied. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the first page. Her expression changed. I watched her lips press together, her throat tighten. She flipped to the second page, then the third. Her fingers trembled slightly now. I don't understand, she said. He didn't tell me about this. No, I said calmly, because he didn't need to. He made his decision. Her face turned pale. She looked around the room like someone trying to spot an exit or an ally. There were none. You're not entitled to the house, I continued, or the savings or the insurance policy. Everything David left behind, he left to me. You can't do this, she snapped, her voice finally cracking. I was his wife. Yes, I said, and I was his mother. She stood there, holding the will like it had betrayed her. But it wasn't the paper that betrayed her. It was her own cruelty, her dismissal, her arrogance. And David had seen it all. I won't fight this, she said after a pause, trying to save face. I don't need his money. I leaned in, voice soft. Then why are your hands shaking? She flinched. I turned and walked away. Out of the reception hall, out of the church, out of her reach. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt no triumph, no gloating, only truth, only peace. The will was just paper. But what it meant, that David saw me, that he honored me, that he made space for me even in death. That was power, real power, the kind you never have to announce. The confrontation at the wake was quiet, final. Kayla hadn't said a word to me since, but I knew the silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. She was used to control, used to doors opening when she knocked, and she still believed she could turn this around. She was wrong. A week later, I received a message from Joel. She's contesting, he said simply. Filed a claim for spousal entitlement, wants a share of David's life insurance. I let out a soft sigh. Does she have a case? No, he said. David excluded her on purpose, legally, emotionally, deliberately. Every document was updated, dated, notarized. His final designation was you. And there's a letter. A letter? I'll send it over. He wrote it 6 months ago, asked me to keep it sealed unless she tried something. That night, I sat on the couch, a blanket draped over my knees, and opened the envelope Joel delivered by courier. Inside was David's handwriting, not printed, not typed, just a single sheet of lined paper, signed and dated in blue ink. Mom, if you're reading this, it means Kayla is trying to fight the will. You don't have to say anything. Let Joel handle it. You don't owe anyone an explanation, especially not her. You were there for me when I was sick, when I was scared, when I didn't tell anyone, not even Kayla, how bad the episodes had gotten. She never noticed. You always did. This was never about money. I just wanted to make sure the person who never left me was left with peace. I love you. I always did. Even when I got quiet, even when I let her pull me away, I saw everything, and I chose you, David. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried, not with the grief of a mother who had lost, but with the deep, steady ache of someone who had finally been seen. He had known every slight, every humiliation, every tear I wiped in silence. He had known. The next day, Joel submitted the letter to Kayla's attorney. There was no need for theatrics, just facts. Just David's voice, cutting through the fog of her narrative with crystal clarity. The silence that followed was final. 2 days later, Joel called again. She's withdrawn her challenge. She won't be pursuing anything further. I thanked him quietly, hung up the phone, and sat still for a long time. Justice isn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it's a quiet line in a letter. Sometimes it's a name on a line next to beneficiary. Sometimes it's the look on someone's face when they realize they were never as untouchable as they believed. But I wasn't done. David's house, my house now, had remained untouched. I hadn't even stepped foot inside since the funeral. I had let Kayla stay there temporarily, knowing it wouldn't last. That day, I called the locksmith and scheduled the change of all the locks. She received official notice the following morning. Legal, clean, indisputable. Vacate in 7 days. Keys no longer valid. I don't know what her reaction was. I never saw her. I never heard from her. But I imagined her walking through those rooms one last time, realizing every vase, every rug, every framed picture. All of it sat on borrowed time. She packed her things and left. A week later, I stood in the doorway. The house was quiet. Dust lingered on the window sills. A faint trace of her perfume still clung to the curtains. I walked through each room slowly, barefoot, letting the floorboard speak. I stopped in the kitchen, where I'd once dropped off lasagna and heard her tell David I didn't belong. I stood there, tall and still, and whispered aloud, I belonged all along. The final act of justice wasn't that I won. It was that I never had to raise my voice to do it. David had chosen. Life had answered. And now Kayla was gone, not just from the house, but from the narrative, from the power, from the illusion of superiority she had clung to like armor. She hadn't just lost. She had been seen through. And I walked out of that house not just with keys, but with everything. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Kayla left the house. The locks were changed. Her name was off every deed and document. I'd hired a cleaning crew, repainted the guest room walls, and even opened the windows wide to let new air in. Slowly, the house began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a blank slate. Somewhere I could breathe again. I had no intention of reaching out. That chapter was closed. Kayla had shown me who she was time and time again. And David's final act, that will, that letter, that silent line in the sand, had been enough closure for me. But closure doesn't always mean quiet. One afternoon, while watering the small garden at my condo, my phone buzzed with a message. Unknown number. Marla, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I'd like to talk, if you're willing. I didn't need to ask who it was. Kayla. I stared at the screen, letting the words settle. There was no apology in the text, no direct acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, just a request. A familiar need to hold the floor, even when she no longer owned the room. I set my phone down without responding. I finished watering the roses and wiped the dirt from my hands. But all afternoon, her message echoed through my mind. I'd like to talk, if you're willing. I wasn't sure what she expected. A fight? A second chance? Maybe some kind of forgiveness that would cleanse her of the decisions she made. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and called Eileen. She messaged me, I said. Eileen was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I hesitated. I don't want revenge. I just don't want to feel like I'm still carrying her around even now. Then meet her, she said, but on your terms. The next morning, I replied with a single sentence. Me. You can come by tomorrow at noon, 20 minutes, that's all. She arrived at exactly 12 o'clock, dressed neatly but simply. No designer coat, no makeup mask, just a woman stripped down by reality. I opened the door and stepped aside. We sat in the sunroom across from one another, an untouched pitcher of water on the table between us. Kayla glanced around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. I haven't been here in years, she said. It's warmer than I remember. I said nothing. I wasn't there to make her comfortable. She took a breath. I didn't expect the will to be what it was. I nodded. I know. I thought I knew David better than anyone. That's not true, I replied, not with anger, just truth. You knew parts of him, but you didn't know the part that remembered everything, the part that never stopped being my son. She looked down at her hands. I didn't handle things well. Still no apology. Just a vague admission, offered too late. You humiliated me in my son's presence. You made me feel like I was nothing. And he saw it. That's what you didn't count on. You thought he'd follow your lead, but he remembered who built him. Kayla's throat bobbed with a quiet swallow. I was threatened by how close you were. I thought you wanted control. I never wanted control, I said. I wanted a place. You're the one who couldn't share. Silence hung between us like fog. Finally, she asked, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her, and for a moment I saw not the woman who excluded me, but the one David had once loved. And in that brief flash, I realized something. I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her anymore. "No," I said calmly, "but I don't owe you anything, not my time, not my grace, and not a space in my life." She nodded slowly. Maybe it stung. Maybe it set her free too. She stood. "Thank you for letting me speak." I walked her to the door. "Take care, Kayla." And that was it. Not a reconciliation, not a reunion, but a release. She left and I didn't look back. I sat in the same chair after she was gone, sunlight warming my legs, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. She had come for peace, but I already had it. It's funny, the way grief rearranges you. In the beginning, it strips you raw, turns the world colorless, makes the simplest things, setting the table, folding laundry, hearing your own footsteps in a quiet house, feel unbearable. But over time, if you let it, grief becomes something else. Not softer exactly, but wiser, less cruel, more honest. That's what I learned. It's been several months since I last saw Kayla. She didn't write again. She didn't send flowers or ask for more conversation, and I didn't expect her to. We both walked away from that final meeting with clarity, not about each other, but about ourselves. And now I don't spend my mornings waiting for texts that never come. I don't bake and wonder if anyone will eat what I made. I don't keep the guest towels fluffed or rehearse conversations in my head where I try to prove I'm worthy of being included. I don't try anymore. Instead, I live. My days are quieter now, but not empty. I joined a writing group at the community center on Wednesdays. Mostly women, mostly widows, all with stories too heavy to carry alone. We write, we cry, we laugh harder than I expected we ever could. One of them, Janet, told me, "You've got a novel in you, Marla." I don't know about that, but I do know that putting things on paper makes them real. And then somehow, lighter. I also finished converting the guest house in the backyard into a retreat space. I named it the Jensen Cottage, just like I told Joel I would. It's small but warm, cozy, not cramped. We host women for weekend stays. Teachers, caregivers, mothers starting over. Women who gave everything and were left with too little. They arrive carrying exhaustion. They leave carrying something closer to hope. Sometimes I leave a note in the drawer by the bed. A short message, always the same. You are not invisible. You were never too much. The world just forgot how to see you. I think David would have loved that. Not a day goes by that I don't think of him, but the ache doesn't consume me anymore. It sits beside me, a quiet companion like an old photograph. I talk to him sometimes, usually when I'm watering the garden or sitting in the rocking chair out front. And every so often, when the breeze hits just right, I feel like he's listening. I kept the letter he wrote me. I had it framed not to hang on the wall, but to rest beside my bed. I don't need to read it often, just knowing it's there. That in his final months, he thought of me, defended me, loved me without hesitation. That's more than enough. I don't dwell on the pain anymore. I don't replay the dinner table humiliations or the cold silences. Those things happened, yes, but they no longer define me. What defines me now are the choices I made after. I didn't destroy Kayla. I didn't curse her or expose her. I let her feel the quiet weight of being left behind by the man who once stood beside her, and by the mother she thought she had erased. That was justice enough. My power was never in a signature on a will. It was in the years I gave, the love I offered, and the quiet strength I never lost, even when they tried to take everything from me. I am not bitter. I am not angry. I am free. This morning I made a cup of coffee and sat on the porch with the sun warming my legs. A robin landed on the railing, its feathers bright and flickering in the light. I watched it for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you, David." And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like something was missing. I felt whole.